What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Homie Hangout, where we help others move in excellence. And I'm gonna tell a story about when the Nazi lowriders and another wood rushed me and Flaco. And the way that this came about was on a live a few days ago, based on a different question. I had briefly mentioned it, and then Flaco from Real Talk with Flaco had wound up doing a video about it. And this is not like a reaction in the sense of I disagree with what he said, but obviously I was there. And I think on some things I have a little different perspective, and maybe some details that he inadvertently, I think, unintentionally left out. So here we go. It was night yard, right? Solano level 3, 1 yard. It was night yard, and at the time I was yard security, and I was the highest person on the food chain that was outside at that time. The lifers had all been put on closed B status, and so they had all been moved to building 1. And they weren't allowed night yard anymore. They weren't allowed family visits and a bunch of other stuff. And so we're out there and there's some woods hanging out on our side of the yard. And they're not around us. They're not around the blacks, but they're there. Technically, I should not have got at them because as the authority on the yard at the time, I shouldn't have put myself and my mainline status in jeopardy. And so if things would have gone off right at that moment of me getting at them, I probably would have been in a little trouble. But I had no reason to think there would be an issue. This was not the first time that Woods was on our side of the yard, or the first time I had gotten at them, or other homies on patrol had got at them. And so I had no reason to think this was going to be a big deal. And so I walk over there, Flaco was with me. And so I walk over there and I say, hey, are you guys doing any business over here? And they said, no. And I said, just hanging out. I said, okay, I think you guys would be more comfortable hanging out on the other side of the yard, right? And they're like, no, what do you mean? And I said, well, this is the northern black side of the yard. That's the southern or white side of the yard. And so I think, you guys would be more comfortable over there hanging out with your people. No, man, so you're saying we can't be here? I never heard that, and how long you been here? I said, I don't think I've been here as long as you, but that's not really the point. I was told about this when I first came. And so maybe you should go holler at your folks, and I'm sure they'll give you the rundown, right? Because if you look around, everybody but you guys is acknowledging this, who goes where. And so, and the body language wasn't rough or anything else, but this conversation had been happening for too long. And so another homeboy had seen this, and some northerners started kind of posting up around us. Now, keep in mind, our numbers were ridiculous compared to the Southsiders, and really we rivaled the number of the whites on the yard too. And so they post up over there. It's the only place I've ever been that's like that. And so they're like, well, we'll go over there when we're ready. Okay. So I was like, all right, man, no problem. And I turn around and I rub my stomach, which is a symbol for, hey, we're going to rush these dudes. And I kind of shrugged, looking at the homies like they really want this? And I walk back over there, walk back over to kind of a little group of us. And by the time I get there, these dudes are already heading back to their side of the yard. And my thought is, you know what, man, we'll get at Hot Rod in the morning. Hot Rod had some authority with the whites. He was a Sacramaniac, but he was also a lifer. So he was in building 1. And so I figured we'll get at him, in the morning when they're all able to come out and, he could check these dudes or whatever. I also got at the blacks and I said, hey, you guys didn't catch this? You guys didn't see these dudes over here? And they're like, no, man, but we ain't really tripping. That's kind of your guys' thing. And when I say got at the blacks, right, or got at the Africanos, the blacks in Solano there was a bunch of little cars, right? The up north bloods, the down south bloods, same thing with the Crips, the 415s, the Muslims, wrecking crew out of Oakland, and just a whole bunch of little subgroups. And I don't remember exactly who I was that it was talking to, and I don't remember exactly what fraction they were from. And so I'm like, man, whatever, And then we look, and there's a wood standing on top of the table on their side of the yard with all the woods on the yard around the table. And he's just up there talking. You can't hear what he's saying. He's on the other side of the yard, but I'm looking and I joke with a homeboy next to me, and I was like, what's that fucking Hitler over there, right? I had never seen anything like that, and I've never seen anything like that since. It's a bit of dry snitching, in my view. because obviously the COs are going to see this and it's going to draw a huge amount of attention. And so I was like, look, we're going to just wait and see what happens, right? And all of a sudden they start walking over in a group, all of them, on not on the track, but on the cement pathway. For those that have been in prison and been in prisons of this design, there's a cement road, so to speak, that runs one side of the yard and it circles around the little cul-de-sac where building 1, 2, and 3 is, and then same thing where building 4, 5, and 6 is. The track is just a dirt track that goes around the yard. So they're walking on the cement part, and they're coming in between building 3 and building 4, right? Right in the middle, there's a pisser. So they're coming up, and I said, look, if they make it to building 4, we're gonna get them. And we're not gonna rush over there because we have the strategic advantage over here. And so so we're like, you know, whatever. And we had homeboys placed in strategic places, and everybody knew what the assignment was. And at this point now, the blacks are very much involved, right? And so they're ready to get off. And in fact, they're by building 4 ready to get off first if they cross that line. And then we're going to come through in our way of doing things, right? So unsurprisingly, they never make it that far. The SEALs come out, they yell yard down. All the SEALs got zip ties and canisters and gloves on. You know, they came out prepared, and they probably started preparing when the old Hitler dude was standing on top of the table barking at everybody. And so they do a controlled recall, right? Where every group segment goes back one at a time to their buildings. And so the Southsiders went before us. I go to my building, which is building 3, and next door to me was a Southsider that I had talked to on various occasions. And he was a cool dude. So as I'm walking to my cell, he's like, hey, Rascal. And I go to his cell door, and he goes, hey, just so you know, the Woods got at us and wanted us to ride with them against you guys. And I was like, that's interesting. And he goes, yeah, but we told him no, right? Like, it's all Raza, bro. We got our own issues, but we didn't have no issue with you guys. And they're on some racist shit. What we look like, following a bunch of people with swastikas and stuff, man, because they tell us to. So we told him, nah, man, you're on your own. And I was like, man, that's cool. Thank you for the heads up, bro. And I respect that, right? So we come out, I think we're locked down for a couple of days, but we wind up coming out in the morning when we do get to go to the yard, and everybody gets to come out. And so every group has the highest numbers on the yard that they've probably ever had. And Tito, who had the keys to our yard from Stockton, was walking the track with Hot Rod from Sacramento. And they had a very unusual relationship for Norteño in the Wood. And there's a whole story that maybe I'll get into another time. But they're walking and talking, and there's security trailing them about 10, 15 feet behind. And then they come over to our side of the yard, both of them. And Hot Rod's basically like, hey, man, sorry for the misunderstanding last night. I'm going to deal with it. These kids and stuff, man, they're on some other stuff, man, but I'm going to go ahead and take care of it. And Tito looked very happy with this. He was like, yeah, Hot Rod got it. And so some of us that were in leadership, we're like, nah, if it was just the issue of them being on our side of the yard, that's one thing, right? And if they took their time walking back, okay, that's one thing. Sir, that's some in-house stuff you guys can deal with. But this was a show of aggression. This was a show of force. And that don't fly, right? And the manpower on the yard, the homeboys on the yard, some of whom were striving and getting educated and into the politics and everything else, and a large number of them just kind of identified as Norteños, and they were like, look, if we get off on the south sides of the woods, we're part of that, but otherwise we're not taking counts, we're not writing essays, we're not holding positions, we don't want no part of that. And again, unlike any other place I've ever been or heard of, that was allowed. And so, but those dudes now want to go get off, right? And so it causes a further divide with the leadership if we try to tell them now, Holmes, we're deciding that we're not going to get off. Right? Because they want to be gang members. They want to go gangbang. And I don't blame them in this sense. And so some of us are talking and figuring out what can we do, what can be done that would satisfy our people's appetite for blood while making the least amount of sacrifice, right? And so we had different ideas. there was an idea floated. Apparently one of the woods had yelled Buster at some point. And so we were like, hey, what if we just book that dude, right? What if we stab him and the other folks that are involved in this kind of leadership in the woods, get them off the yard. But even the northern, the Norteños that weren't really programming were like, nah, we want blood on that one. And so, so that conversation was happening. There's a bunch of conversations, right? But anyways, it all got shut down, basically. Tito was the overall authority on the yard. None of us had the technical authority, right? If we're sticking to the script, none of us really could make a decision that he didn't agree with. Now, we could have removed him from leadership, but that's a whole nother story in terms of getting permission and where do you get permission from, and especially those of us that are youngsters, right? I'm 20 years old at the time, wanting to make sure that we're not going to do something that's going to F off our career for the rest of our time. And so I'll cover that when I do a spill on Solano overall. But so it gets squashed, right? And how Raza says the woods are going to take care of it. Nothing gets taken care of. They don't remove nobody. Nothing happens. And a little bit of time goes by, right? Time enough that it was kind of forgotten, to be honest, right? And so one of my duties on the yard during night yard was, we had building channels and we had, folks on the track taking counts of the various group segments. And so I would collect all of those reports and then would take a lap, most of the time with Flaco, and we would stroll. And because our leadership was in building 1, we would circle that little area, right? So we circled around, went to building 1 to convey the reports and the numbers to the homeboys in the day room, and which was kind of hot behavior, to be honest, but level 3 was a very relaxed prison. And so stuff was done there that I can't imagine happening in other places. But that's how it worked. So we go, and I did that virtually every night. And so do that. And then I'm leaving building 1, right? Flaco and I are leaving building 1, and we're walking. And these 2 woods are walking towards us, but woods walking around that area is not unusual, right? And so not really paying attention. And again, there's some lessons in here that I'll touch on at the very end, but wasn't really paying attention. And as they get close to us, we had scooted a little bit just to kind of share the track. We didn't get off the road, but, make room, right? And these dudes are walking, and I catch them kind of right before it happens, where they're walking like this, and then they look and they rush. Here we go, right? So we're chunking them, right? We're fighting. There's no weapons involved. It's 2-on-2. As Flaco said, he got knocked down. I thought he only got knocked down once. Maybe he got knocked down more times than that. I could tell when he got knocked down because I'm fighting the person in front of me, and all of a sudden I'm feeling hits on the back of the head. And I'm doing everything I can just to stay on my feet, to be quite honest, right? Like, these dudes were a lot bigger than us, and they got the drop on us. They busted the move first. So I'm playing catch up, right? And stayed on my feet still, right? And handle my business. But I felt that extra pair of fists, and I'm like, this is a lot, right? Because he's hitting me into the dude that I'm fighting in front of me, and I'm trying to keep at a distance. And then those hands stopped. And that's when Flaco had gotten back up and re-engaged with dude. And so I was thankful for that. We wound up getting snatched up, yard down, the whole 9 yards. We go to the center complex, and we go to the hole, right? All of us, all 4 of us go to the hole. And so, and the yard is locked down. Now, I am thinking it's going to crack, right? Like, maybe it should have cracked before. It probably should have, but Tito cannot wiggle his way out of this one, right? He can't convince it. And part of the reason being, and it shouldn't be like this, but I was thinking if there needed to be extra incentive, which there shouldn't, I was a hermano, right? I was a bro. And so there's an obligation. Again, in my view, there's an obligation to support even if I wasn't, because you never allow another group segment to get off on your people. And but especially as a hermano, there's some of those folks on the yard are absolutely obligated to address that. And so I was sure that's what was going to happen. and they're on lockdown for like 2 weeks, right? And we're in the hole, and then they come off lockdown. And even though the hole is building 10, so it's on yard 2, and this happened on yard 1, you can hear alarms when they go off, right? Even in the hole. And so I'm thinking alarms, and the SEALs came by in the morning. Hey man, heard the doors are gonna pop today. Your boys is coming back out. What's gonna happen? I was like, I don't know. I don't really have any boys. I'm just back here hanging out, man. And so at this point, Flaco and I are cellies again in the hole. And so, but I'm waiting. Inside, I'm like, oh, I'm waiting to see a rush of Woods come in bloody and beat up. And then a handful of Northerners unscathed, chest out, proud. Like that's what's going to happen in my mind, right? No alarm. There's no alarm. All day goes by, there's no alarm. The SEALs come by to bring dinner. They're clowning me. The SEALs are clowning me in my cell as I wait at the door to get my dinner. What's up with your brothers, man? What's up with your brothers? I thought for sure your brothers would stick up for another brother. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about, bro. My brothers are in the streets and one's in heaven, so they don't, but they would stick up for me. No, your brothers, your hermanos, the structure guys. I don't know what you're talking about. And they're laughing. And in my head, I am fuming. Oh, I was fucking livid, right? I'm like, I got CEOs clowning me because my people, folks that I committed to engage in this movement and the struggle for forever, have puckered up and laid it down. And even if the odds were stacked against them, even if there was no real chance for success, you still got to go out there and shed blood, right? And give it a shot. But that wasn't even the case. Like, this is low-hanging fruit. And I don't say that to disrespect Woods. I'm just talking about the dynamic on that yard. That was low-hanging fruit. And nothing. The next day goes by, nothing. And so talking to some of the people in the hole, Jojo, who Flaco mentioned, Jojo from Stockton, we were on the vent together. He lived right above us. And so we actually had 2 cells next to each other up top and on the bottom. And so we could utilize that vent to pass kites to each other and whatnot. And they're like, man, Tito got to go. But they had been saying back there that Tito had to go. And I didn't disagree. I was in agreement with that. I was particularly in agreement with it after this, though. That I'm like, this is inexcusable, right? There's no justification for this. There's no needing permission. There's no nothing else. Like, this fool, that's a wrap. And I felt personally betrayed. I'll be honest. And so Tito didn't always lead the best example. That's a whole nother story. But I felt personally betrayed. And so we're talking and unbeknownst to me, I didn't even know, but Mac, this dude from San Jose, who could give a shit less about politics and wasn't engaged whatsoever on the yard. He was one of the people that just kind of hung around, did whatever the hell he felt like. But he had attained some kind of authority back in the hole. I don't even remember what he went back there for, but he had gotten some kind of authority back in the hole and linked up with Jojo from Stockton, and Jojo was no good, but there were some questions about it. Jojo had come out to our yard and he was on our yard for like 2 days, and then he got rolled up. And so there's a whole bunch of funny shit going on, but that's not the point. So apparently they had got at this dude K9, right? Stan Viega from SAC, who's a servant of the Lord now and a minister. And K9 wasn't with none of that stuff either. He was a hustler on the streets that caught a case. He can give a shit less, right? But somehow they got word to him, and K9, a straggler, so to speak, walked up, fired on Tito, and they came back to the hole. And so when they come back and I see Tito walking in, I immediately get at Jojo. And I'm like, hey, when he comes out to yard, if he comes out to my yard, because the AdSeg and Solano, there was 2 yards and then a walk alone lane kind of in the middle. And we had Northern or Black yard for a while. Then it was just Northern yard. But so when we went outside, some folks went to one side, some folks went to the other, but it wasn't routine, right? It was kind of a crapshoot. And sometimes you could talk to the COs and whatnot, but so we were split when we went to yard, but we went at the same time. And I was like, man, if he comes out to yard, that I'm on, or I want to try to get on his yard, that's all me. I want that, right? And they said sure, right, of course. So he didn't go out to yard, right? He locked it up in terms of going to yard. He didn't have a cellie. Somebody else had filled out a cell slip to try to move in with him. He had denied it. Then they got at me and they said, hey, Rascal, why don't you try it? Because you guys had been cellies before in the yard, and he's gonna think that he kind of has the upper hand on you, and psychologically and relationally. And so you can go for it. And then that situation unfolded, and I'll put that in another video. I wound up getting off on Tito. Things didn't go exactly as planned, but he did agree to the cell thing. I went up there and it was what it was. And he wound up being one of my 1030s when I ultimately got validated, a few years later. So that was that, man. And some of the lessons in there, for me that I walk away with was, and I think these apply whether you've been to prison or you plan on going to prison or not. Don't get too comfortable. And I don't mean that just in a violent sense, right? You can't walk away with all your nerves tight and hyper aware and high beams on all the time. That's not realistic. It's not healthy physically for your body. And so that doesn't work, and especially in society, right? But there's a difference between that and just feeling like you got this in the bag. Anything can happen at any time, right? And so whether it's at work, whether it's in a relationship, whether it's with your kids, no matter what, right? You have to be diligent. Don't just think, I would suggest, don't just think, hey, everything's cool and I could be on cruise control. Because you're on cruise control, you're not paying as much attention to the road. Somebody cuts you off and you're in a wreck. And when you get in a wreck, it's too late to second guess or whatever, right? You're in the wreck, you got to deal with it. And the other thing is, don't be too casual about situations. Now, me confronting those woods about leaving our side of the yard did not result in violence at that time, but it could have, because one of the folks that was involved in taking off on Flaco and I was a part of those 3 people that was over there, right? And so that dude held a grudge, and clearly. And because I didn't really hold a grudge, right? I thought it was foolish what the Woods did, but I didn't necessarily hold a grudge. I wasn't waking up every day thinking, man, these motherfuckers, right? Apparently he was. And so don't underestimate that. Don't underestimate that somebody might be coming for your spot, right? Be mindful, right? That's kind of what it comes down to. A final note real quick for those that have stuck around this long. Flaco mentioned when another act, which he called a cowardice act, in which Southsiders rushed a few Norteños and there was no consequence to that. Let me kind of explain a little bit why that went the way it did. And I'm not justifying it. I'm not saying it was right or wrong, but there's a little more to it than that. And that is, so Smiley Ramos from Sanjo, Hobo, right? Glenn Holden from the city, and Ricardo London from wherever Ricardo's from, all people that was around in the NF mainline days, right? I'll just kind of leave it at that. We're on our yard, right? And Ricardo London wasn't even labeled as a Northerner. He was an other. But so these 3 old goats would walk night yard all the time, right? And this is before the whole close custody thing. Lifers can't go to night yard because they were all lifers. So they were walking a yard, and maybe a week prior, a bus had come and brought about 10 or 12 Southsiders that were very fit, razor shaved heads, like they was ready for war when they got off the bus. And you could see that there was some division between them and the Sureños that had been there, right? And the dude calling shots for Sureños there was a guy named Rick. And I talked to Rick often about different things, never in a casual way, right? It was always when there was a thing to be discussed. But so these dudes pull up. We notice kind of little iffiness between them. Get at Rick, I mean. And we're like, man, what's up with these dudes? And he's like, we're trying to get them to kind of go with the program, right? And we're like, okay, well, hope you're successful at that, right? And again, we had rushed the Southsiders on that yard a couple times. And so Rick wasn't eager to get off. And he was strung out on heroin and there was a lot of drugs on the yard and everything else. So he didn't want to leave. And I don't necessarily blame him. Apparently these Southsiders, the ones off the bus, decided they didn't want to stay there anymore. And so they took off on the 3 oldest dudes on the yard as they circled the track around their side, I think thinking that they would be easy targets. And then also thinking now the rest of the Sureños that aren't involved in this incident, they're going to have to get off, right? Or be gotten off on by us. So they're going to force these dudes into a conflict, right? And again, I think this kind of falls in line with the idea of going on that yard for a Sureño and staying on that yard at that time was not good for your career as far as they're concerned. They picked the wrong 3 old men, right? Like these dudes were around in the 60s and the 70s when the culture in prison was different and the level of violence was different. And so even though they were older and they got to get high, you know, there's a muscle memory to war, right? And there's a switch there. And these youngsters flipped that switch, and I don't think they were ready for it because these 3 old dudes beat the brakes off of every single one of them, right? And had them tangled up in a soccer net, everything else. Like they really, really got the best of those dudes. Some got it worse than others, but it was a very one-sided affair. And when they started fighting, we seen it, right? A lot of us seen it and figured it was the Sureños fighting with each other, right? Because it's dark, it's night yard, you can't quite tell. Everybody's in blues and jackets and shit, so you can't really tell. And it wasn't until Ricardo had very long hair, and it wasn't until we saw long hair floating around that we were like, who's that? None of them Southsiders got long hair. Like, what the hell is that? Oh shit, that's Rick. Well, if they're getting off on Rick, and we look, and there's no Smiley, there's no Bo. So that's when people start running across the yard, right? And homeboys start making a move for it. And Flaco was one of those people, and you know, he made it pretty far in the grass. There was a handful of others that went as well. But by this point, they're laying the yard down, right? Seals are out, yards down, they're pepper spraying. And so the homeboys that were getting ready to jump at that time, I and then other people that were in leadership that were on the yard was like, nah, fool, pull back. And the reason we said that was because the yard's already going down, right? So you run across the yard. For one, you might get shot for running across the yard. But for 2, even if you make it over there, you're not going to have no action at the oppositions. You're going to run into a wall of COs and get snatched up. And that does nothing for us, right? That does nothing to rectify this conflict. And so that issue happened, and then wind up talking to Rick, right? And it was other leadership, right? It was Tito and them that got at Rick in that situation. And Rick's thing was like, look, man, we tried to tell them how to go with the program. They decided not to. We're really sorry that they got off on those guys. Those guys were pretty damn impressive. And we don't want no smoke. We don't want no problems. We don't want no issues. And we promised that everybody that was of that mindset was taken to the hole behind that incident. There's nobody else left that's pushing that line. And we really just don't want issues. And so they were told, basically like, okay, well, you guys don't be grouping up. You know, don't have such numbers on the yard. You want to keep your numbers kind of low, and don't do anything in the building or out that would lead any of us to think that you guys got a problem, right? And that was some bullying involved in that, to be quite honest. And again, I've never seen anything like that, you know, since. Just the dynamics of that yard, that is how it worked. And the Northerners on that yard were bullies, right? The Southsiders got rushed one time just because we didn't like where their numbers were. Their numbers got close to 50, and we had said you can't have more than 50, and so we rushed. That's bully stuff. That's oppressor type behavior, and we're supposed to be different than that. But power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. And having the numbers on a yard, folks let that shit get to their head. And so that was just the reality there. And like I said, wasn't never like that anywhere else. And so that was that. You know, that's my view on that situation. And Flaco had mentioned some conversations in the hole. he was having some talks with people that I wasn't having. And some of those folks in the hole, they didn't like me and they were suspicious of me because I was in a position of leadership, because I was striving, because I was schooling people, because I was doing all that. And they weren't. They had a bad taste in their mouth when it comes to me, right? Which is odd because I got a tattoo from Mac on my shoulder. Like, we were cool, but just, you know, the dynamics got goofy. So I think from some of their perspective, they were like, oh, Rascal has to do this because this is what we think. Those conversations might have happened, but it was completely unnecessary because I was going to jump regardless, right? So yeah, that's an interesting twist. And that's what it is. Anyways, look around, man. I got a bunch of content. Help others move with excellence. That's what homies do. Help yourself at the same time, and you guys have a good one.